Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darien Library for another great virtual event. We have a cooking event tonight, which I know you're going to enjoy. And we want to thank our friends at Barrett Books who have this book on the shelves, Beef It Up by Jessica Formicola. I can't see if there we go. I have to do things in reverse sometimes. And it's really fun, and she's going to do a demo for us. We also always want to thank our friends at the Darien Library who make these programs possible. You can type questions into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll take them at the end. We can share recipes with you at the end, and the library does have some copies of this. One is in stock, the rest are out, but Barrett's Bookstore does have them. So before we begin, let me tell you a little bit about Jessica. Jessica Formicola is the creator of Savory Experiments, a trusted food blog and lifestyle blog. She works closely with the beef industry, frequently collaborating with the certified Angus beef brand, ranchers and butchers. This collection comes from years of experience, and she's excited to share her wisdom with home chefs across the country. Beef It Up is Jessica's first cookbook, and you'll love the demo tonight. It's really fun. So sit back, enjoy, and get hungry.
Hello, everybody. I am Jessica Formicola. I am the author of Beef It Up. It is my first cookbook, but I have been a professional recipe developer for over 10 years now. And I do work very closely with the beef industry. And it was kind of a match made in heaven when they came to me and said, hey, do you want to write a book? And I said, I do, but I want it to be a little bit different. Couple of things make this book so much more different than the others. All of these beef recipes are recipes that you can make in your kitchen with no special equipment. So the majority out there are barbecue or grill or smoke or even the flat top grill now, which are all wonderful, and I use them as well. But for me, I was a city dweller for many years, as I'm sure a lot of you guys were too, before I made my way out to the suburbs. I didn't have a grill and I didn't have a smoker, and I still wanted to be able to enjoy beef without those tools available. So these are all new takes on old comfort classics. They have some new twists. We've added a lot of veggies. We've added a lot of color and given them some modernization, if you will, but also then just some fun twists, like the recipe I'm going to make for you tonight, which is beef pad thai. And I'm sure you've all had pad thai, and I'm sure you've all had beef, but they usually don't come together. Most people usually do a shrimp pad thai, a chicken pad thai, or a vegetable pad thai. This is one of my favorite meals to make because of the fact that it is naturally gluten-free. So if you have a gluten-free crowd, you're good to go. It uses rice noodles instead of regular noodles, makes it naturally there. It is full of veggies. Got to have veggies. I have 2 small kids, so I am always trying to pack veggies into any meal in any way I can that they cannot conveniently pick them out or scrape them off their plate. I also use it as a clean out the vegetable crisper kind of a meal, because almost anything can go into it, not just what's in the book. And as we get talking, you'll find that I'm a big proponent of people being able to customize their recipes. I want you to feel comfortable and confident in the kitchen, and I want you to really enjoy the product you're making. I want you to feel special and good about what you're putting on the table and what you're feeding to your family. Cooking doesn't have to be a chore. And you can even get the kids and the rest of your family involved. But it's also a 1-dish meal, and it comes together in under 30 minutes. I really like good food. I love going out for good food. So I don't want to have to sacrifice flavor and good food just because I need to have a meal on the table in 30 minutes. Okay, let's get this party started. So I'm going to put on gloves to work with meat. So we're working with a top sirloin. It's a larger piece of meat, but it's a cheaper piece of meat. Doesn't mean that it's a bad piece of meat. This entire sirloin is going to feed a family of 4 to 6, which is amazing right now, considering that chicken and all these other things are so expensive. This is a meal that can be made on a budget for a large amount of people. So I've got this roast here. A roast is anything that's a larger piece of meat that's going to feed multiple people. And I'm going to cut it into really thin strips. I'm going to help it be tenderized, and I'm going to cut it against the grain. So cutting any piece of meat or protein against the grain is the trick to making it taste and feel amazingly buttery and delicious and totally tender. The reason being is that all proteins have fibers, And the length of the fiber is going to feel chewy in your mouth if it's long. But if it's short, it will feel super tender and easy to chew. So not all cuts have grains going in the same direction through the entire cut. So one of the things that you're going to want to do is, for this cut, I'm cutting against the grain here. But over on this piece, the grain changes direction. So I'm actually going to change direction with it. This beef has a little bit of fat on it. There's a couple of pieces here that are a little bit larger that I'm just going to get rid of, trim those right on off. But fat striations aren't a bad thing, especially in beef. In beef, in fact, I mean, one of the things that we pay so much money for at high-end steakhouses is to have a nicely marbled piece of meat. It's not a bad thing in moderation. And if you've got small little ribbons of fat running through it, that is going to help tenderize it while it cooks. It's going to give it flavor and make it delicious to eat. So there's a balance. Obviously, we don't want anything that's too fatty because we're all, watching our health and everything else. But we also want a little bit so that we can add flavor to the dish. Okay, so I'm coming to this little fat striation here. I'm going to get rid of this, trim it off. Some of these are a little long too. I'm going to cut them in half just so that they're easier to eat when we put them into the dish. Okay, and this is that piece there that I was telling you about that changes direction on you. So this, again, like I said, going against the grain goes with nearly any piece of protein. Chicken, pork, beef. I especially use it when I'm doing any kind of a sandwich, especially a steak sandwich. Have you ever had a steak sandwich that you're literally fighting with while you're eating it? Cutting things against the grain super thin shortens those fibers so that they are melt in your mouth, delicious. And the next thing we're going to do is add a little bit of salt. I like to use a coarse kosher salt when I'm cooking. I do use Diamond Crystal. You guys, I know, watch a lot of cooking demos, and I'm sure you've met with a lot of very, very famous chefs who talk about their salt. People are very passionate about their salts. I am too. I am a hoarder of salt. I have 28 different kinds in my pantry. It's kind of insane. Okay. I use Diamond Crystal. Not all kosher salt has the same grain size. Some are larger and some are smaller. So knowing the type of salt you're using and the recipe you're using it in, and also your own flavor affinity for salt, is really important. So I'm going to go ahead and just sprinkle some of this on there. This is also going to help tenderize the meat. Okay. My favorite type of salt. I'd say my little tiny screen, guys, so I'm like squinting to see it. My favorite type of salt of all time is a Maldon sea salt or a Jacobson sea salt, a flaky kind of sea salt. And then, of course, kosher salt. So I use kosher salt while I'm cooking. This is going to work in two ways, this salt here. It's going to help the exterior of the meat dry out a little bit, which is something we're going to talk about when we talk about browning, which is super important. And then it also helps accentuate the flavors, that brings out the natural flavors in beef. And a top sirloin is a fairly flavorful piece of beef, so I don't need to give it too many other flavors, but you got to give it a little something, right? It needs everything, could use a little bit of help in this world. A flaky sea salt, like a Maldon or a Jacobson, is great for finishing, and it can go on anything. It can go on a steak, it can go on chicken, it can go on veggies. I put it on just a regular salad. In fact, my friends and family make fun of me because I actually have it with me at all times. We call it my travel salt, and it comes in a little tin, and I break it out at restaurants all the time. They are wildly embarrassed with me, but you know what? I don't like poorly seasoned food. And you shouldn't have to have poorly seasoned food. And restaurants very rarely carry flaky salt. I judge them on their salt. If I ask for salt and they bring me flaky, I'm like, you're okay in my book. That and good butter, right? Okay, so I'm putting just about a teaspoon, probably a little bit more than that actually, because I'm eyeballing it here, into a cast iron pan. And I'm going to get it nice super hot. So our goal here is to brown the beef. And I think one of the things that people do so often in home kitchens is they see browning things, but they don't actually brown it. To brown something, you need a fairly dry surface. The salt is going to help absorb some of that excess liquid on the exterior so that it does dry out the exterior of the beef, okay? And then you need something super, super hot. You need a high heat. I want to hear the sizzle. You're trying to get the moisture on the exterior to evaporate out super fast so that you can get a good brown. That brown develops acidity in different foods, not just beef, chicken, vegetables, spices, herbs. I'm sure that you've been told to toast nuts before. This concept is the same for all of these foods. It brings out the natural flavor, and when you add heat to anything, it changes the flavor profile. This is why in some recipes too, like slow cooker recipes, so like brown the beef before you put it in, or brown the chicken. Everybody's like, why would I do that? This is a slow cooker meal. I'm trying to save time. I'm always like, well, you're going to lose a little bit of flavor. It's your choice. It'll still cook, but you're going to lose a little bit of flavor if you don't. So I've seasoned my beef. I have a very large cast iron skillet because this is a one dish meal. So I've got to make sure everything goes into the same one, noodles and all at the end here. And I'm going to throw it on in. I hope you guys can hear that sizzle that's happening. And now we are going to brown our beef. Well, it sits and sizzles a little bit. I'm going to chop up my veggies. We talked at the beginning of this how this is my kind of clean out the vegetable crisper recipe. The actual cookbook is going to tell you to use carrots, snap peas, and red bell pepper. But I like to put anything I can find in there. So this half of onion that was left over from last night's dinner. Please remember what we made last night. Left over from last night's dinner. I'm going to use this. So I'm just going to cut it into some strips here. Garlic is another great thing to put on in. Fresh bean sprouts. I have shredded carrots just because that's what I had on hand, but you can use chopped carrots or sliced carrots. Totally up to you. You can cut them in a julienne style, like larger strips, or you can have them shredded and small or just in like little dish. Totally up to you. I'm using snap peas. You can use sugar peas. You can use any kind of peas that you want, or just leave them out if you don't like those. Bean sprouts are another fun one. And I'm actually going to double up on the amount of bell pepper that I am using tonight. Oh, bell pepper, that looks so good. I'm going to cut it into strips. Right out there. Just because, again, I like to make sure that I'm eating all my veg, and veg doesn't have to come just from salad. Veggies can be in all of your meals. I'm gonna I have a red and a yellow bell pepper. Again, I have small kids, so we always talk about being able to eat the rainbow. The more colorful I can make a dish, the more lively, the more fun it is for them to eat, and the better off it is for you. I'm sure you guys can relate. If it's not kids, sometimes it's husbands. I won't, make any generalizations there, but it happens. So I'm just going to easily cut these into strips while my beef is browning. I'm going to toss it. The other thing with browning is you don't want to fiddle with it too much. The only way it's going to get that nice brown sear on it is if it has contact with the hot pan. The only issue I'm having right now is that I'm using this camping stove, and it doesn't get as hot as I need it to get with this giant cast iron skillet. It's okay. We're going to make it work. We're going to improvise, right? Part of cooking is always improvising. I don't know about you guys, but I often forget an ingredient. Like I thought I had something, and then I get home and I'm in the midst of cooking and it's not there. So either I make my husband run to the store or I improvise. Tonight we're gonna improvise with the heat of our pan. We've got these going. So if your pot isn't hot or your pan isn't hot, and I'm using, again, like I said, cast iron, if it's not hot enough, sometimes what happens is the protein or the veg, whatever it is that you're working with, starts to steam instead of brown. And that's what I've got going on over here. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's creating, because it's not hot enough, the heat is not evaporating off as fast as I'd like it to. So we've got a little bit more liquid, because just naturally speaking, that's what happens with any kind of protein. It has some liquid in it, some water, even the best brands and the best cuts. So that is what will happen. Doesn't mean we're not going to have an amazing dish, because pad thai, as we all know, has a very flavorful sauce that goes with it. So browning not only goes for beef like this, but also ground beef. And this is one of the things that I talk about in the book, Beef It Up, is that ground beef is often also not cooked properly. When somebody says brown your ground beef, you're supposed to do it on a super high heat. Don't touch it. Let it make contact with that pan. And you almost want it to get a crust on it, almost like a bark on it. That means that it's really good. It's going to stay nice and juicy on the inside. It's going to develop flavor, because we've all had ground beef that's kind of grayish and chewy and a little bit rubbery. And that just means somebody did not do it right. So brown your ground beef correctly. We go over tips like that for working with beef and other ingredients in the first chapter. The first chapter, as long as we're talking about swapping things out too, and is that beef is sometimes kind of tricky because there are so many cuts of beef. It's not like chicken where you just have a thigh or a breast or a leg. We've got over 150 cuts on a piece of on a cow, and that means that there are a lot of different options. And it's also different because not every cut is prepared the same way for maximum flavor. So we need some sort of a guide to help us figure out which cuts can be swapped with other cuts. And that can be intimidating. And quite often what ends up happening is at the meat counter, somebody picks up a piece of beef that looks like the right size, shape that they think they need for the meal, not necessarily the right cut. And what that means is you could end up picking up a piece of beef that does better with a really long, slow liquid method, like a braise, kind of like a pot roast or a chuck roast, instead of something that needed a high, quick, high heat sear, like a top sirloin or a tenderloin. So we can have all these different types. They all require a good amount of TLC for their particular function. This book breaks it down for you. I have a grid in the first chapter that takes every single piece of beef, tells you exactly where it's from and the best way to prepare it, and also what to swap it for if you are in the store and the recipe that you are using they don't have that cut of beef. So it's really ingenious. It's great. Also, flavor affinities for beef. Like I said, I love to have people create their own recipes and their own flavors. This beef is as brown as it's going to get in this pan right now. I wish I had a little bit more char on it, but I just don't. The little liquids that are left in the pan, though, I'm going to leave them in there because you know what? Those are going to add flavor to our sauce and our veggies. So I'm just taking the beef out. I want to make sure that I don't crowd the pan. Crowding the pan means that I've got too much in there and nothing's going to be able to cook evenly or well on its own because there's just too much stuff. And things that are crowded in also create steam, so I won't get as much of that brown, because I also want a little bit of brown on my veggies. I'm going to add just a little more dollop of vegetable oil. Here you can use canola oil or vegetable oil. I like using those because they have a high smoke point, meaning that they won't burn easily. And when I'm working on super high heat and with cast iron, it's very hot. And olive oil, butter, things like that have a lower smoke point. And some of other oils, like a sesame oil, which would taste delicious in this, will start to taste bitter or rancid if it gets too hot. So I want to avoid that. So I'm just using a neutral oil like vegetable oil and a well-seasoned cast iron pan. Ooh, I'm spitting a little bit, it's so hot. A well-seasoned cast iron pan probably doesn't need any oil at all. You can cut that right on out. I'm gonna throw my bell pepper and my onion right on into that same pan. and get them all into a nice single layer. Ooh, these are getting some brown on them. Makes me so excited. Makes me so excited. Okay, I am going to let those get a little bit of brown and we're going to start talking about our sauce. So pad thai sauce, for those of you guys who have had it, is this amazing burst of flavors. It's so sophisticated and complex, but honestly, the sauce only has a handful of ingredients. So when you look at this recipe in the book, it looks like this really long list, but it's actually super simple and a lot of things that you probably already have in your pantry or in your fridge, like soy sauce or brown sugar. The only things you might not have is fish sauce. So fish sauce is one of these funny ingredients. At the moment I say it, and I can't see you guys, but raise your hand at home or snicker at me if, as soon as I said fish sauce, you went. Most people do for me when I say fish sauce. So fish sauce it's a little bit of a funky ingredient, not gonna lie. It's made from fermented fish, but fermentation is like the new thing on the food front. It's the trendiest thing out there. In fact, I was just out in California and their big thing right now is preserved lemons. And I'm sure New York City, I haven't been there in a couple of months. New York, I'm sure they're on that same food trend train of preserved lemons and different things that are fermented, like kimchi and kombucha, things along those lines. And fish sauce is the same thing. So it's a very deep, complex flavor profile. And a lot of people are just scared of it because it's fermented fish. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try it. And in fact, if you've had pad thai before and you like pad thai, favorite fish. Yes, I can talk about fish in 1 second. If you've had pad thai, you like fish sauce. It's like the key element in what makes pad thai sauce taste so yummy. So this is actually, this is our fish sauce. We're using a good dash of fish sauce. It even smells a little funky, but I love it. I love being able to smell these things. We have a dab of soy sauce. If you don't want fish sauce, like you're really opposed to it, then just grab extra soy sauce. It's fine as long as we have something that's like bold and acidic. It'll work its way in. Again, if you're going gluten-free, find a gluten-free soy sauce or coconut aminos. That was rice wine vinegar. You can use seasoned or regular rice wine vinegar. I have fresh lime juice. So again, I know you guys are experts out there because you guys have all of these people coming to talk to you. I always tell folks about citrus, fresh citrus. Make sure it is fresh. A recipe calls for lime juice or lemon juice. It is not talking about the stuff in a squeeze bottle that looks like a lemon. It wants fresh lemon. Any kind of citrus, oranges included, which is why your mimosas taste so much better when they're freshly squeezed, is the best and the most flavorful straight out of the fruit. And as the moment it is juiced, the flavor starts to de-intensify immediately. So to get the full impact of any kind of citrus, make sure that you juice it immediately. So I've got fresh lime juice. I'm going to add my shredded carrots and my peas over here because I want my veggies to still have color and to still have snaps. I want them to be just a little bit toothy when I eat them. I don't want them to be like limp, little looking like they used to be a vegetable. I want them to be bright and fun. I'm gonna let those soften when I finish making stuff. So chicken broth is the base to this sauce. I use chicken broth. You could also use vegetable broth. Another fun thing about this recipe is the sauce and the base is gonna be the same. You make the protein separate. So if you have somebody that's pescatarian and they only want shrimp, just make the shrimp and the beef in 2 different pans and you're good to go. If you have somebody that's vegetarian, make the shrimp, beef, and veg all in different pans and you're good to go. So you can really make this for a variety of people without having to sacrifice flavor, still making the same dish and enjoying the same dish and not having a bajillion pans out there. So this is chicken broth. I always use low sodium, clearly using things like soy sauce and fish sauce. There's a little bit of acidity and a lot of salt already in there. So we don't want to use any more salt. We want to be able to control it. You can add more salt, you can't take salt away. Okay. Brown sugar. I love the deep molasses flavors of brown sugar. And this sugar is going to help balance all of the other complex flavors that's in it and leave a little bit of sweetness on your tongue afterwards. Lastly, peanut butter, because peanut butter goes in pad thai. So I think the recipe calls for like 2 heaping tablespoons. Clearly I'm using, I'm spilling, but I'm also using a little bit more because I love peanut butter. So feel free to make this recipe your own by adding or leaving out things that you love or don't like. Get my veggies in a little swirl here, and I'm going to show you these in just a few minutes. This is my favorite appliance. I have wonderful appliances at my house. Let me tell you, this little mini food processor is like my best friend. I chop things, I mince things, I make salad dressings, I make all sorts of sauces, and it is dishwasher safe. And because I use it so much, it leaks a little. So I have to cover it with a towel here so that I don't end up covered in pad thai sauce. I do chop onions in here. If I have to do like a really small minced onion, I definitely put it in the food processor, like for meatballs or something, 100%. If I'm just going to slice them and I just need a few, it's not a big deal, but yes. I didn't forget about the question about fish either. I will get there in 1 second. So this sauce, you could also, if you don't have a food processor or a mini food processor, you can even do it in like your smoothie blender, like the little bullets. Just whisk it together. It probably won't come all the way together and you're going to have like strands of peanut butter in it, but that's perfectly fine because it's going to melt as soon as it hits the pan. So have no fear. So I'm just going to pour this on. Oh, wait, I forgot to step. I'm getting all excited talking about peanut butter and fish. I forgot about the egg. So I don't want to use a different pan for my eggs. So I have a little trick that I do here where I take my veg, and I'm going to show you this in a second. I'm going to take all my veg and I'm going to push it over to the side of my pan so that I'm making a little space like so. Okay, so now I've got, see how these veggies, they're brighter in color. They didn't lose their color yet. I want them to have that toothy snap to them. I want to be able to taste them. I don't want to be lifeless old veg. And I'm going to crack this egg right on the side. Oop, got a little bit of shell in there. And I'm going to use the same tongs I've been using this whole time. I'm just going to scramble it right on in the pan. As long as you move fast enough, this is a really hot pan, you are going to get your scrambled egg right on in there without having to make another dish messy or take everything out. You can also, if you're looking for even more protein, you can double up the amount of protein you're putting in this, and you can also add more eggs. I usually use just 1 egg. Okay, so I'm going to mix this all together now that that egg is cooked. See how fast it cooks because this pan is so hot. Okay, now sauce. So the sauce, if your peanut butter, if you did it the manual way, is a little stringy. It's fine. It's all going to melt and it's going to be all great and wonderful and dandy. And just mix it in so that it starts to heat up and melt in there. So this dish is also great for meal prep if you're a meal prepper or you want to make it ahead of time. But I'm going to give you a tip. If you're going to do that, I highly, highly, highly suggest that you make extra sauce. Even if you know you're going to have leftovers, like I know I'm going to have leftovers after my husband and I get done eating this. The kids are going to bed. They love it too. They'll eat it tomorrow for lunch. But the rice noodles suck up all of the moisture. They suck it all in. So it gets a little dry when you're preparing the leftovers. So what I usually do is I make a double batch of sauce and I set the sauce aside in the fridge. And then when I'm going to reheat it or I'm meal prepping, I'll put just a tablespoon or 2 of extra sauce in each container or back into the skillet as I reheat it so that it kind of revives it and it doesn't taste as dry and I've got that fresh sauce there. Okay, so I put the sauce in, sauce is heating, it's bubbling. I'm gonna add the beef back in. Now, obviously, if you are making a mixed protein meal for different lifestyles, then you wouldn't do this. You'd keep your proteins on the side, not a big deal. And lastly, we have rice noodles. So these rice noodles are already cooked. Some there, it's funny because around here they're labeled so many different things. You can find them as rice noodles, pad thai noodles, stir fry noodles, whole bunch of different things. This one is about the size of a spaghetti, not as flat and wide as a linguine, but if that's what you want to use, something like a drunken noodle, long and flat, be my guest. I already cooked them. Rice noodles are very finicky, so make sure that you follow the instructions on the box and cook them to al dente, because again, they're going to go back in here, cook a second time, and absorb up so much of that sauce. I also, which I would not do with Italian noodles, like to rinse them with cold water to stop the cooking process. Rice noodles cook super duper fast, so fast. And just the residual heat on them while they're draining can cause them to continue to cook. And unfortunately, they also get a little slimy and sticky and weird if they continue to cook and get overcooked, and then they're not nearly as good. Okay. And mine are a little bit sticky. I put a little bit of oil on them so that they wouldn't completely clump together on us. For purposes of this demo, as soon as they hit that sauce, they're going to be perfectly fine. I'm going to toss this all together. I wish you guys could smell this. So other things I like putting into it, celery, I like garlic if you've got garlic. Broccoli is good. Brussels sprouts are good. Cauliflower is good. I've even done parsnips. Parsnips, if you read Savory Experiments at all, you know parsnips are one of my favorite underused root vegetables. People just don't use parsnips and rutabaga nearly as much as they should. They're both amazing vegetables. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off because we're done. So I'm going to plate it up. And this is also fun, especially if like this is one of those easy meals. It's not like a dinner party meal, but for if you were to serve this to a large group of people, like I made this for when I had all my family in town for Thanksgiving. And on the side, then I kind of have like this bar of things to put onto it so everybody can make their own plate. So we've got our plate here and things that I have to put onto it. Let me get this out of the way so you guys can see what I got going on here. Okay, we've got scallions. I like the fresh crunch of another type of onion, and scallions are a little bit milder than the white onion that I put in there. Cilantro, of course, if you are a cilantro hater, if it tastes like dirt or soap to you, just omit that. But again, we're putting it on afterwards, so you don't have to change the whole recipe. Peanuts, these are roasted peanuts. They are unsalted. Again, I like to be able to control my own salt with my travel salt box. And fresh lime wedges. I also usually serve this with some fresh bean sprouts. Again, I love that fresh crunch that you get from a fresh bean sprout instead of putting it in the stir fry, but you can also put it in the stir fry if you'd like to, and hot sauce like a sriracha or something along those lines. If you want a super spicy pad thai, go ahead and add some chilies to the actual mix. I'm usually making it for my kids. One of my kids loves spicy food, one doesn't, so I leave it out. My husband then douses the entire thing with sriracha, which is fine, but I like it just like this with a ton of lime juice. So I'm getting my veg, I'm getting my starch in the form of a rice noodle, which is a good one, and I'm also getting my protein in the form of egg and beef, which beef, I know right now is getting kind of a bad rap, but you know what? Everybody has a different definition of healthy these days. And for me, it's just not processed food. Beef is still one single ingredient. So I still eat it obviously in moderation, like everything else in life. So there you go. My super easy beef pad thai. We did it in what? 30 minutes. 30 minutes and it's on the table, and it'd probably be even faster if I wasn't talking to everybody and telling stories. But it is amazing, and I know you guys are going to love it. And you can get this and 49 other amazing beef recipes in Beef It Up, my new cookbook. So to answer the question about seafood, I love seafood. I could eat seafood every day of the week. So my favorite fish, that's a really hard one. I think it depends on what I'm making. If I'm doing like whole fish on the grill, I usually use a red snapper or bronzino. If I'm baking fish, I usually use salmon. I like a baked salmon. If I'm frying fish, I usually do cod. I also like halibut in the oven if I'm baking. But I live in Maryland. I live right down from you guys, right down 95. And we are huge fans of rockfish down here. We use rockfish in a lot of things. And we also do a lot of crabs. So Maryland blue crab, I know that's shellfish instead of fish, but it's still a good one. And we also do a lot of oysters. So I love fresh oysters. I live out in the suburbs, kind of the country, and we have this wonderful seafood guy that sits at the exit of the highway in his box truck and sells the most amazing oysters and clams you've ever tasted. But it's always kind of funny when I tell them, like, where'd you get them? I bought them off the back of a guy from a truck. Like, oh, okay. But they're really great. He's legit. Don't worry about it. So I guess those are probably my favorite fishes. I've had a lot of fish though. We eat a lot of fish. I actually probably eat chicken the least. We do a lot of beef and a lot of seafood and a lot of vegetarian meals and fruits. So it's, again, all moderation. So there you go. I can't see the other question.
There was another question. What would you substitute for peanut butter?
Oh, that's a good one. I get that one a lot. So it really depends on if it's just because you don't care for peanut butter, you don't have peanut butter, or if you have a tree nut allergy. You could definitely use almond butter if you want to swap that out. And you can omit it too. It's not the end of the world if you leave out the peanut butter or the peanuts at the end. The flavor in the sauce is so bold and complex even without that. And by the time it melts, it's not acting as a thickening agent. So it's not going to impact the texture of the sauce either.
We had some questions from this afternoon. What cut of beef is your favorite?
Oh, that's really hard. So that's really, really hard. I mean, it really depends on what I'm making. I would say that my most versatile cut of beef is a good old-fashioned tender chuck roast. So what some people know as pot roast. I can throw that in a slow cooker, I can braise it and shred it and use it in a million different ways, whether I'm making sandwiches or quesadillas or tacos, or serving it as a traditional pot roast with gravy, or freezing it in little baggies for later for other things, putting it in soups, stews, all sorts of things. Of course, I love a beef tenderloin. A nice filet mignon never disappoints. And if I'm just ordering a steak at a restaurant, probably a New York strip is on my list.
Let's see. Someone asked, excuse me, this is on chat. Can you talk a little bit about keeping your cast iron pan seasoned, how to clean it, and how to store it?
Oh, you're speaking my language. Yes, I love cast iron. I have wonderful stainless steel, and I still go for my cast irons, like my $12 Lodge skillets every single time. So to season cast iron, some of them come pre-seasoned, and you can get really, really fancy ones that are enameled and pre-seasoned and look pretty, but this is a workhorse and they're going to chip. And so I actually tell people to go for some of the less expensive ones because it's fine. So even a pre-seasoned cast iron skillet needs to be seasoned. And to do that, it's just covering it in oil and baking it several times. So when it comes, it'll be kind of porous. You'll see it, it'll have crevices in it, and it will be a little bit rough. After a piece of cast iron is seasoned, it'll be slick, it'll be flat, and you actually won't need to use as much oil with it. And to do that, it's just this process of oiling and baking and oiling and baking and oiling and baking. You'll hear people say, don't scrub it. I agree with that. You don't want to scrub it because you also don't want to scrub off all the seasoning you put on it. And that seasoning, it's called seasoning because it adds season to whatever it is you're cooking. It's kind of an acidic browning comes along with that browning flavor. So you develop it as it goes along. If you do need to clean it, like if you burn something in it, it's okay to use soap. I know that people tell you not to. You can, you just need to re-season it. It's not the end of the world if you have to scrub it. You just have to re-season it. So then you'd cover it in oil again. You want to use an oil with a high smoke point. So canola, vegetable, sunflower, avocado oil, very, very, very light layer. I usually use like a paper towel and wipe it on. It should be slick. Put it in the oven for about 45 minutes, like 300 degrees. and then take it out and you can store it. I usually store mine with a light layer of oil on them as well, just because if they sit for too long, they can develop a little bit of rusting and things along those lines. But mine get so much use, I don't think that that's ever going to happen. But so when you do want to clean it and you're just generally cleaning it, my advice is to use a coarse sea salt or a coarse kosher salt. Say that 5 times fast. And a potato. So the starch, so cut the potato in half so you can use it kind of as your scrubber. And the salt is going to season the cast iron, but it's also going to create grit so that you can get any of those dried up bits that did get on there off. And then the potato is also starchy, so it helps with that seasoning as well. You aren't going to lose little bits into the cast iron like you would if you were using a traditional sponge. So you also don't want to leave little bits of sponge in your cast iron. So those techniques work really well for cleaning kind of a gritty one. I'm not a huge like antiquer, but I love going to find old cast iron because it's usually been so well seasoned through like a million years. So if you do find yourself in an antique store, the best thing to look for is cast iron.
To add on to that question, can you talk, wait a sec, does cast iron affect the taste of food?
I think that it affects your ability to be able to get that nice brown on it. And to some extent it does. It adds to that browning effect because of the heat it can get up to. So it gets up to a super, super high heat. And one of the reasons cooks like it so much is that it's a high heat and it's an even heat. And that is going to affect your food directly, regardless of what it is you're cooking, whether it's mac and cheese or not. But it's also versatile because you can take it from the stove to the oven and back again, and they rarely break and they don't scratch. You could do that with stainless too. Like I said, I have stainless. If I'm using pots, I have a lot of stainless stuff as well that I utilize, but the cast iron definitely adds a little bit more flavor to the meal.
Someone wanted to know how many people that pad thai recipe serves.
This pad thai, well, I'll show you the finished pot here, which doesn't even have all of it in, would probably serve 5 or 6 normal people. My husband will eat like half that pan by himself. But yeah, I would say generously, if you're giving very generous portions, at least 4.
Okay.
And if you're serving it with something else, 5 or 6.
I had some people ask about some of the recipes in the book, and I noticed the first chapter is small bites. Will you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. So it's funny. So people, when they think of beef, like they think of also men. That was another one of the things that made this different. I'm literally the only female beef cookbook author, which was interesting because grilling seems to go hand in hand with males as well. But so do just main meals. It's thought of as a celebratory protein and it's thought of as a main dish, but very rarely thought of in forms of appetizers, unless it's like a beef carpaccio, and soups and stews or salads. So we created a lot of recipes for those too. So we have mini beef Wellingtons, which are super easy. In fact, my 4-year-old daughter helped me make them. So, and now I've got a cat here. Sorry, I forgot to put them away. Between my throat and the cat and the animals, where it's romper room over here. My kids are actually out of the house. So we have a mini beef Wellington. We use ground beef a lot too. I think ground beef gets a bad rap, and it's so versatile and easy to use. I think more people should use it. So we do some stuffed jalapenos there. We do soups. So we do the one that always gets people is a cheeseburger soup. It's basically a deconstructed cheeseburger in soup form. And the first time I had it, I was a little iffy, I'm not gonna lie, but it was one of the best things that I had ever tasted. And now it's one of our staples for when we're like watching football or Super Bowl Sunday, because you could just put it in a crock pot and leave it on low and then let people dress it themselves. And it's a lot of fun. We use croutons as like the bun, shredded lettuce, fresh tomatoes, and then it's a cheddar cheese based soup with ground beef in it and other onions and other flavors in it. And then the salads too. So like I said, I love veggies and I love color. So I'm always trying to create all of these great salads. There's a peanut satay salad that I absolutely love. And these are meant to be entrees. They're not, you could serve them as a starter, of course, but they are meant to be fulfilling and satisfying steak entrees and not just your regular steakhouse, wedge salad with blue cheese dressing. So we've got that one. There's also a fun one that pulls in that greens and salad doesn't have to be lettuce. So we do roasted onions and potatoes and Brussels sprouts and a lemon vinaigrette that goes over it with thinly sliced and seared beef. So that one's really fun too.
The person who asked about the pad thai wanted to know, do you have any recipes using soba noodles?
I do. On my website, I do. I actually have, I have one that I love that's standing out to me right now that uses like a honey soy sauce and sesame seeds, and I do it with vegetables. I think it's, if you go to Savory Experiments, there's a search bar up in the right hand corner, and if you type in soba, it should pop up for you.
And favorite soups with beef?
I'm an Italian girl. I love a good Italian meatball soup. That's probably one of my favorites growing up, but that cheeseburger soup is been growing on me for several years now. And of course, chili. Chili's a stew. I mean, people, kind of forget about that. Although the one in the book is just beef, but I love also doing it with ground pork. So like sausage and beef. It's different texture and different flavor, and that's a lot of fun too.
Would you give us the website address, please?
SavoryExperiments.com.
There you go. We had somebody call in earlier asking, do you ever cook short ribs without bones?
Yeah, boneless short ribs, of course. So my favorite way to do short ribs, either with a bone or without a bone, is in a pressure cooker. So a lot of the recipes in this book, none of them use special equipment, but there's several of them. And one of them is a short rib recipe where we give an alternate instruction. So short ribs are a funny little piece of beef that's literally a short rib. If you've never had them, they're about this big. And the hardest part is sourcing really good ones, because in grocery store restaurants always find these like giant meaty ones that are like Fred Flintstone size that are amazing. And somehow when you go to your grocery store, they always have like these little baby ones. And you're like, it's not what I wanted. So ask your butcher. Butchers love talking about beef, even at like your general grocery store, or if you have an actual butcher shop, ask about it. Generally, they'll be able to find you what you need, or if you call ahead. So short ribs need a lot of moisture because they don't have a ton of fat on them. So they need a lot of moisture. So they either do well with a liquid-based braising, so a long braise, or in a pressure cooker, like an Instapot if you have one. And you can get amazing short ribs in about 20 minutes if you've got a pressure cooker, to the point where when you go to pull them out with your tongs, the bone will literally fall right out of the middle, and you'll get this wonderful shredded beef that has tons of flavor. It's a very flavorful cut of meat, which is why people love to do it.
Someone asked, how do you cook a London broil?
London broil. So my favorite thing for London broil is probably either boiling it or grilling it. It's a thicker piece of meat and it doesn't have a lot of fat on it. So I do marinate it, and those you need to marinate for a little bit longer in a very highly acidic marinade because of the fact that it doesn't have fat to tenderize it. So something that's got citrus in it, soy sauces in it. Soy sauce bases are always really good for those, or a vinegar base. Those are going to be great for a London broil. And they're best cooked to about a medium. I would never go above medium or medium rare with a London broil either. And those are also going to be super important for making sure that you're cutting against the grain in really thin strips. Because again, it doesn't have that natural fat in it to be able to make it super soft and tender in your mouth. So you kind of have to create that effect.
There's a question, do you ever work with wine? Port with beef, thinking back to your beef ribs?
I cook with wine a lot. First step, open bottle, test wine. So yes, I do. Did you say port with short ribs? I've never used a port in my short ribs. Usually when I do port, it's an after dinner drink. But I do a lot of red wine and like demi glazes and reductions. And wine is also very acidic. So you can use wine in marinades and also in these types of reductions and glazes. And yes, red wine in short rib, I'm on it.
And then someone asked for your favorite cut for stews.
That is a good question. So a top sirloin can do really well if you're going to brown it first and then add it so it can braise. I still use a tender chuck roast because the soup, depending on how long it is, if it's like a quick soup and I'm just putting it together, like it's not going to have a lot of time on the stove. I would go for something that's naturally tender, and I would actually splurge and probably do a New York strip for that. If it's going to sit there for a long time, if this is a long simmer stew, like I call those Sunday stews, like, you've got all day to let it fill your entire kitchen with aroma, then I'd go for that tender chuck roast again, even just cut into cubes.
Someone also asked, do you have any tips for using slow cookers?
Yeah, use them. They're like a dying breed. But basically, so slow cooker was it's like the Instapot and the air fryer, I feel like, have replaced the slow cooker. But slow cooking is just a tabletop braiser. That's really all it is. So in your head, if you could think about it as I'm braising something instead of slow cooking something, that works. So my tips are, even if the recipe doesn't call for it, make sure you brown whatever it is you're putting into the slow cooker ahead of time. My only qualm with the slow cooker is that the sauces that you're cooking in, it needs a good amount of liquid. Whatever you're using in there needs a good amount of liquid, because you're braising doesn't reduce, because now we're putting the lid on and the steam and the liquids don't have any way to escape, which is great for whatever protein you're making, but not for the sauce that it's in. So the sauces usually need to be thickened or re-seasoned afterwards. And again, because we're slow cooking, we usually think about this as a time saver. A lot of folks aren't willing to put in that extra time to make that into like a lovely sauce. So I usually pour mine off, I'll put it into a saucepan, I'll reduce it fast on the stove while the meat rests, because another tip, make sure you rest your meat. My mom, she's so funny. She doesn't like to rest the meat because she wants it like piping hot. I'm like, it's going to be so much better if you let it rest. It lets all those juices come back into the fibers. Again, any meat, pork, chicken, beef, even fish, let it rest for at least 10 to 15 minutes before you eat it. You can tent it with aluminum foil, and you can even like pop it right back in the oven just to give it a little bit of a sear. But it's the difference between losing all your juices on your cutting board or your plate versus eating them in your mouth and making something nice and juicy and tender. So what was the original question? Now I've got myself all over the place.
The tips on slow cookers.
Oh, slow cookers. Yeah. So while the beef is resting, just that's when you can prepare your sauce. So move it over to a saucepan, bring it up to like a rapid boil so that you can reduce it by at least a third. Then I usually taste it for seasoning, because they've usually, unless you've used a lot of seasoning on the protein, they've usually lost a lot of that. So sometimes you'll need to add salt, add pepper. And then I usually thicken it with cornstarch. Cornstarch is my thickener of choice because it doesn't taste grainy, and it also gives a nice glossy effect. Other thickeners like arrowroot can, and even flour, can make things look cloudy or clumpy, and I don't like that. I like that nice, pretty glossy type of sauce. And sometimes right before I serve it, I usually add a splash of something acidic, so some type of vinegar, and a tablespoon of butter, which makes it super velvety and rich. And that can be used in almost any sauce that comes out of a slow cooker, regardless of what global cuisine you're making.
There was one question about what type of beef do you buy? Do you buy a certain grade?
So grades, when a cattle is coming off of ranch and being processed, somebody from the USDA comes in and they look at the entire cattle, and that's how they make their determination of what grade it is. And which is interesting, right? So it also means that you can kind of play the system if you know what to look for in grades. So instead of just looking for the sticker that says prime, and I'd only do prime if I'm serving a steak, so New York strip, a ribeye, a filet mignon, tenderloin, something like that. Other than that choice and select is of course the lowest, you can almost get away with it sometimes getting a prime piece because like humans, like people carry fat and all the other things. We're all built a little bit differently, right? Well, so are cows. So you can find pieces that might have, if they were individually marked, be a prime, but they're labeled as a select or a choice just based on that particular animal. I usually go for something in the middle. I usually go to, I like to buy local, but I also, if I'm not buying from one of my local butchers, I do go for certified Angus beef brand. It's not paid, this isn't a commercial, but they are a larger brand that only employs American owned and run farms, cattle ranches here in the US. So you know your beef is coming from a small, managed and run family-owned cattle ranch. And I like that. These are people that care about their animals. They take pride in what they do. They take pride in the work and the product that they're providing to you. And that to me is more important than what sticker went on the front of it.
Will you tell us that name again?
Certified Angus beef brand. Okay. So they have a little logo. Do I have anything around here with it? I don't think
Certified
I do.
Angus.
Yeah, certified Angus beef brand. It's red and gold and has a little cow on it. Okay. And it's carried in many grocery stores. And grocery store brand beef, I mean, if you have to buy it, it's fine. It's not, but that certified Angus beef brand has 11 different things that ranchers have to abide by for the cattle to even qualify. And the entire herd has to qualify, not just that single animal. So it's a higher quality of beef before it even hits the USDA person that's telling you what grade of beef it is.
What's the scoop on Kobe beef? Like, what is that all about?
So, I mean, if you're actually eating Kobe beef, you're in Japan. It's very rare that it's actually found here in the US, although there are some breeds of cattle here in the US that people call American Kobe beef. So Kobe is a beef that is extremely tender, and the reason it is extremely tender is that it is marbleized really, really well. So this is something that's also kind of funny within beef lingo. People are always looking for grass-fed beef. Cows actually really like corn, and starch is what makes those great striations in things like Kobe beef. So, and cows aren't generally eating other things because it's really expensive to feed them those other things. They're generally eating native grasslands and corn and other leftover things that are upcycled from other types of farming. So carrot tops, turnip things like that, and leftover things from almond milk actually are one of the top things that cattle are fed. So they're actually upcyclers, but they're fed a lot of really good, delicious, and healthy things. They aren't fed like weird processed foods because that's expensive for a cattle farmer. They don't want to do that. Just like they don't want to give their animal antibiotics unless it's sick. They don't just give it preventatively. So the Kobe beef is farmed in a different way. It's usually brought to market a little bit younger, and they're not allowed to graze. So part of the reason that they stay so fatty and marbleized is that they're kept in very small stalls. So if we're looking at just being humane, right? Not my pick.
No, it doesn't sound like it. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and let me show everyone the book again because it is great. And the Barrett Bookstore has plenty on the shelves. It's also light and little, so it's great to travel.
Very pretty pictures.
Great pictures, great ideas. And I would highly recommend both visiting Jessica's website and stopping by and picking up a copy either here or at Barrett Bookstore. We can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. That was really fun. You've made us all hungry. And we're looking forward to what you do next.
Great.
Someone
I'm
just said,
always here.
someone said, I'll be making that cheeseburger soup this weekend.
You let me know how it is. So I'm a real person behind that blog. So if you email me or on social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all the things. It's really me that answers you back. And I love talking, clearly. So feel free to message me.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure everyone enjoyed it. And good night, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night for another event. Night, Jessica.
Good night. Thank you.